Well, for me, this game is really about one team that's been incredibly consistent, rock solid, week in and week out, which is Wisconsin. And then the other team that's probably the more talented and has a better top end, but has been wildly inconsistent in Ohio State. Ohio State in the fourth quarter against Penn State was incredible. They've been incredible in some other performances this year, in particular like at Nebraska in a game that Gus and I called. But then they've also thrown out there those games like the second half against Oklahoma, the entire game against Iowa, and a 31-point loss. So they've been wildly inconsistent. I will tell you the key for me is which Ohio State shows up. You can talk all you want about run game and turnovers and quarterback play and so on and so forth. But for me, it's about which Ohio State shows up, because if they play their best, they're likely the better team. But anything less than their best, and I would give the advantage to Wisconsin. And to me, that's where really the game lies.
Joe, when we talk about quarterback play, you with your quarterback background, J.T. Barrett, seeing him in the Michigan game, struggle through the game, being taken out of the game, had arthroscopic surgery on his knee on Sunday. Give me the level of expectations that you expect from J.T. Barrett, from what you're hearing, and or how much of a rope do you think Urban has before he goes to the redshirt freshman and Dwayne Haskins, an asset that most college coaches don't have?
Yeah, and this is one of those problems, if you will, that's not really a problem. It's actually a huge convenience for Urban Meyer, because right now I think JT is going to play. He's going to probably start in the game. And I will tell you, during the course of his career, and really even past that in Urban Meyer's career, in big games and in big situations, he loves having a running quarterback on the field. If you look back to that Michigan game, they got down 14 points. What'd they do? Immediately went to the quarterback run, and it started getting their offense going a little bit. They came back, they scored. Now, it was actually Haskins who goes into the ball game when they're down 6, and he leads them to 17 unanswered points, and their game plan was very different. And so, Chris, this is where it lies for me. I think both guys are going to have pieces of the game plan in there so that they can go with either guy depending on what Wisconsin is doing defensively. If Wisconsin is selling out to stop the quarterback run, in particular early against J.T. Barrett, they might have to go to Haskins, because remember, Haskins is much better throwing the football down the field and on the outside. We don't see that from J.T. Barrett quite often. We see the middle of the game, the middle of the field, trying to exploit the tight ends, trying to exploit some of the linebacker play of the opposition. Meanwhile, Haskins was out there. He's throwing the ball outside of the numbers and down the field. So they've got both styles if they want it, and it just depends on what Wisconsin's going to try to do, in particular early, to try to stop that quarterback run game.
Hey, Joel, speaking of Wisconsin, why does it feel like no one's really talking about them? Words used to describe this team like overlooked and disrespected. How good is this team?
Yeah. They're the most consistent team in America. Okay, they might not have the top end that a lot of the other teams do in the top end or top 10, but I will tell you that week in and week out, they play not only incredibly hard, but they're incredibly sound, and they're very good. The problem is that people just think that this is an Iowa from 2 years ago, and they just skated through a schedule undefeated, and they haven't really been tested. Well, the truth of the matter is they played Michigan, and they beat them up the week before Michigan played Ohio State. They've played Iowa the week after Ohio State lost to Iowa, and what did they do? They gave up 66 total yards to Iowa. This is a really good team, the number one defense in the country right now, with a great defensive coordinator in Jim Leonhard. I will tell you, they don't get a lot of love because nothing is sexy about their team. Their head coach isn't out there with great press conferences. They don't have a quarterback that's up for a national award. They've got a true freshman running back that no one really remembered from his recruiting rankings, because he was only a 3-star kid that came in there and just burst on the scene. That's Jonathan Taylor. So there's nothing really to glom onto if you're a national media source, except for consistency. And quite frankly, that doesn't generate clicks in today's modern world. So they've been passed up, but they better not be passed up much more, because this team is very good, like I said, very sound, and it wouldn't shock me at all if they won on Saturday night.
Joel, I saw you earlier this week on Undisputed. You made, I thought, a really interesting point I hadn't heard anyone make about what the committee did to help Alabama that had nothing to do with where they ranked Alabama. For people that maybe didn't see it, can you explain how, in your eyes, the committee has somewhat artificially inflated Alabama's resume with the way they stacked the top 25?
Yeah, so the committee has been doing this for a couple of years. For whatever team that they like in that top 5 or the top 6 or 7, what they're going to do is they're going to artificially inflate their resume, and it's very easy to do that because you can say, hey, just look at their resume, but when you build their resume for them, that's cooking the books. And that's what the committee does, in particular for Alabama. And here's what they did for Alabama. If you look from 20 to 25, 2 teams that were ranked, I won't say all of the sudden, but certainly in somewhat of a precarious manner, is Fresno State at 25, who, by the way, played Alabama earlier this year. They're a 9-win team. They're playing for their conference championship game. But one of those wins is Incarnate Word. I mean, this is a team that let's just say I don't think Fresno State is a top 25 team. The other team that's on Alabama's schedule and gives them another ranked win is Mississippi State. But the problem is that Mississippi State lost their last game to Ole Miss. Mississippi State is the only team in the entire country that only plays 8 Power 5 games. They play 3 Group of 5 games and an FCS for their schedule makeup, and yet they're still ranked. And all we all want to argue about and bark about when it comes to a team like Wisconsin in the top 10 is their strength of schedule. Well, how about we look at the strength of schedule of Fresno State and Mississippi State? They sneak into the top 25, give Alabama these quote-unquote ranked wins when they really shouldn't be. That's how you cook the books if you're the committee for Alabama, so you can keep them right up there at the 5-6 range so that they're in striking distance if somebody loses this weekend.
Joe, let's move to the Big 12 championship, also on Fox. Baker Mayfield, I'm a huge believer in him. TCU's defense, a lot of people don't know about TCU's defense. How does Baker and Lincoln Riley get it done in the Big 12 championship game?
So they played earlier this year, and here's the thing, CC, is that Oklahoma was incredible in the first half. Almost 400 yards and 38 points in the first half on what was then the 6th-ranked defense in the country for TCU. And you're right, Gary Patterson plays great defense. He's got a lot of hybrid-style players. They've got a couple of pass rushers that can get the job done. But I will tell you this, Lincoln Riley and Baker Mayfield pulled the reins way back. They basically put their offense in park in the second half of that first matchup. And I think it was because they were saving some of their matchups. They were saving some of their formations, some of their personnel groups, because they didn't need to unveil those in that game in the second half in order to win. And they won because their defense played very well. I think they've got a lot of things in the tank. You remember, I mean, here's the thing. In college, we don't get a lot of rematches. CC, you played teams twice all the time within your own division. And if you're going to beat them up in the first time, you're not going to give them your whole playbook. You might play into a tendency in the third quarter or in the fourth quarter in order to then in the second matchup exploit that tendency or break that tendency or create that matchup that you know that you can create with some sort of structure in your offense. I think that's what Oklahoma was doing in the previous meeting, and I think that's why Oklahoma is going to win this matchup on Saturday against TCU.
All right, Joel, I got some quick hitters for you, some scenario questions, all right? So, all right, let's go to SEC and ACC championship games. If Georgia or Miami win those games, is there any scenario where those teams are not in the playoff? They're 6 and 7 right now in the rankings.
I don't believe so. I've gone through a lot of different combinations, and I don't believe that a one-loss champ from the ACC or the SEC, which have been the darlings of this committee all year long, I don't see a scenario where either of those teams would be left out, no.
Oh, okay, so the SEC and the ACC we know are getting a team in because the other teams playing in that game are 1 and 2. So set that aside. So there's 2 spots theoretically open. If Ohio State and Oklahoma both win, will Ohio State be in the playoff?
You know, this is going to be, I think this is going to be one of those epic Sundays where you've got Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Alabama, Ohio State, and they're being pitted against each other because that's where the argument will go, is those 2 programs, which one deserves to go to the playoff. Now, I'm going to argue for the conference champion. It's not because I'm a Ohio State guy or a homer or any of those types of things. I argued that Penn State should have gone last year because I believe that we need to honor conference champions. Here's the one thing I would tell you about Alabama's resume is that it is not very good. It's very thin. They're being propped up by the back end of the top 25, like I just told you earlier. And because of that, I think that a conference champ should go over Alabama if that's the kind of the line of demarcation there with one spot.
All right, 2 more quick scenario questions. If TCU beats Oklahoma, does that auto put Alabama in?
Well, let me just paint another scenario for you. Let's say Miami wins. And let's say Auburn wins. Let's say TCU wins, and let's say Ohio State wins, okay? Let's just play that out. Let's say USC wins. So those are your 5 conference championship game winners. Well, then, essentially, in my mind, you would have Auburn in and you would have Miami in for sure. Okay, then you're going to have 6 teams for 2 spots. You're going to have a 2-loss Georgia. That's a non-champ. You're going to have a 2-loss Clemson that's a non-champ. You're going to have a 1-loss Bama that's a non-champ. Then you're going to have champs and 2-loss USC, 2-loss TCU, and 2-loss Ohio State. Which 2 go? I mean, that's chaos to the nth degree right there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, let's start flipping coins at this point, because this committee is going to have quite the job on their hands. I think in that case, you would see Bama and you would see Ohio State in the playoff, and you'd be leaving teams like Clemson with 2 losses out of the playoff scenario because they didn't win their conference championship game.
Wow, Joel. Thank you.
That was awesome. I like scenarios.
Top to bottom.
Thank you, Joel.
His favorite thing, because he had that
Chaos.
conversation with us. We're like, wait for Joel. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.